children. Her faculty is Joan Marsten. She lives in South Africa.
And
1 second. Sorry for the technical problems. She lives in South Africa, have a background in nursing and social sciences, and has been active in hospice and palliative care for 33 years at local, national, and international level, especially in the field of children's palliative care. On retirement as CEO of the International Children's Palliative Care Network, in 2017, she established Chase Palliative Care in Humanitarian Aid Solutions and Emergencies, which is now a part of Global Health Academy of University of Edinburgh. She is on executive committee of Chase with special responsibility for advocacy, global ambassador for IC and global ambassador for ICPCN. Over the years, she has contributed to numerous publications, WHO working groups, global advocacy initiatives, teaching, research, and conferences. A special interest is in spirituality in children with palliative care needs. Warm welcome, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you and to be with Pallium India again. I feel really like a part of Pallium India. I'm going to share my screen, if I may. Oh, it's not giving me access. Can you give me access? It's not allowing access.
ma'am, it is already provided to you.
Now, why isn't it giving me access? Oh, it's saying that, let's try again. Here, that wasn't a child at one stage.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. There's not one of us that wasn't a child at one stage. So why is it when we become adults, we marginalize this very large group of the population who are part of palliative care? So thank you so much. And thank you to Pallium India for once again inviting me to be part of this training. So could I ask you just for the next slide, please? Right, so when we talk about children in palliative care, we're not only talking about the children who are patients. We're talking about the siblings of that child. We're talking about children who are caregivers of their sick parents. And we're also talking about the child of sick parents. But today, we're going to focus more on the patient themselves, the child that we care for, who is ill and who we are providing palliative care to. And also, we don't forget the friends, because as a child gets older, and especially towards adolescence and in adolescence, their friends, their school-going companions become really important in their treatment. But because we have a limited time today, I'm going to focus more on the child who's the patient. So the next screen, please. Okay, and I really would like to start with this. Sister Frances Dominica is recognized as a global pioneer in the field of children's hospice and palliative care. She started Helen House in England in 1982, and it was the very first children's hospice unit in the world. And she often says, we, the professionals, are the pupils. The child is the teacher. It is a masterclass. And I think for someone who's been working in this field, everything I know really has come from looking after these children. The theory is a backup, but what you learn about providing care comes from the child and the family themselves. Next slide, please. So today we're going to have a look at just a short definition of what we understand by palliative care for children and why it's different in some ways. While we follow the same principles, there are differences, and the differences, of course, lie mainly within the child themselves. We'll have a look at the different categories of children who need palliative care with some examples of diagnoses. I'm going to look at holistic care with a special focus on communication and pain management. And then we're going to look at how do we care for this child at the end of life, which can be the hardest part of all the palliative care that we give to children. So the next slide, please. And we need to remember that child is usually, countries will say to you, by law, a child is from birth till 18, but that child is also somebody's son or daughter. That child is an entity, a being that is growing and developing and becoming. And we recognize, and in law and in international law, the child is recognized as being extra vulnerable and needing extra protection. And that is why we do have things like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and every country will have legislation that specifically protects the child. Next slide, please. So what is pediatric palliative care? I want you to think a little bit about it. And whether you call it pediatric palliative care, children's palliative care for children, it's all the same thing. It really is dependent on what you feel more comfortable with using. So in the medical field, you'll find them saying more pediatric palliative care. With the International Children's Palliative Care Network, we did a bit of a survey of leaders in the field, and they all preferred children's palliative care or palliative care for children. It really doesn't matter, it's all the same thing. Next slide, please. And then just as for adults who need palliative care, it is the relief of serious health-related suffering and the improvement of quality of life. So what we're aiming for is pretty much the same as for adults. It's how we do it and how it relates to that child who's growing and developing. So we're looking after from that tiny little newborn who might only weigh 750 grams up to that teenager with all their emotions and with all their bodily changes as well. And when we respond to the suffering of the child and the family rather than to the disease. Yes, we manage symptoms, but we look at how those symptoms are impacting on the child, on the family, on the interactions within the family and within community as well. So next slide, please. And of course, WHO has got a definition. And I always say to people, WHO first started with a definition in 1998. So for a long time, they've recognized that there are differences. And if we look at the WHO definition, and I'm not going to read it all through because that's something you may have read or you'll go and read afterwards, you'll see that many of the concepts that came into the definition for children are now seen as natural to the definition for adults and the general definition. So beginning when the illness is diagnosed. And remember, we can have children whose condition is diagnosed at birth, who can grow up to become teenagers even into their 20s and 30s. So palliative care for children can actually be provided over a very, very long period of time. And that is one of the big differences between palliative care for adults and children. And it talks about holistic care, which we know, but it also talks about how we can provide palliative care alongside potentially curative care as well. And so if a child is receiving radiotherapy, HIV antiretroviral therapy, chemotherapy, they should and could receive palliative care alongside it as well. It's not an either or, it's the two forms of treatment together. Next slide, please. It's active, it's holistic, it's total, it supports the family, and it goes from diagnosis through death and bereavement. And although we're only going to touch on those issues today, remember the death and the bereavement afterwards when a child dies is often more complex, more intense, and it is lifetime, it is a lifelong bereavement. And so the grief that we deal with when we're dealing with parents can go on for a long time. I have parents who after 33 years, when I nursed their children 33 years ago, still keep contact with me because of the fact that I was part of their life at that particular time. So dealing with children can lead to very long-term relationships as well. So next slide, please. But this is my favorite definition because it was made by Matty Stepanek. Matty was the fourth child in his family to be born with a very rare a neurodegenerative condition. Two of his siblings had died by the time he was born, and one died soon after he was born. And his mother, Matty, died some years ago when he was 12. His mother now has that condition as well and is in a wheelchair. And he was a poet. He wrote poetry from the age of 3. And his definition as a child who is living with palliative care needs is palliative care for children is no longer about helping children to die well. It means helping children to live well, and then when the time is certain, to help them to die gently. And I think that's a lovely definition. We help our patients of whatever age to live well and then to die gently. So if we just remember those two phrases, it gives you a really good definition of palliative care. So the next slide, please. And it's always provided within a children's rights framework. And that's why we have all these different, the global convention that comes from the UN, and of course, every country, every region, and every organization providing palliative care should have some kind of document that states that they are protecting the rights of the child and safeguarding the child. Next slide, please. And so when we're working in the field of palliative care for children, we've got to recognize that the child grows and develops. So if we look at Piaget's developmental stages, and it's always good to go and review that, that little baby that you care for who's diagnosed with a rare condition becomes a 1, 2, 3-year-old, might grow into a teenager. And so your palliative care, of course, and your interactions with that child are going to change as that child grows and develops. We need to remember that while we talk about cultural sensitivity, the childhood has its own culture. It has its own culture, it has its own manner of expression, it has its own languages as well. And we have to know, understand, and be able to communicate in all those languages. And of course, the way that children express their emotions is not always the same as the way we do. So we have to be able to understand why they are showing this emotion and to try and find out the reasons behind it and how to deal with it. We need to understand how children learn and how they have an understanding of their illness, of what is happening to them, of the world around them, and of the something greater than they are, the spiritual aspect of children. And people often are so scared of dealing with spiritual care in children, and it's really very straightforward. I'll touch on that a little bit later. So next slide, please. And as I've said to you, we need to remember that we can start palliative care for children before birth. So while we're not dealing with the child, we're dealing with the parents. When that baby is diagnosed with a life-threatening or a life-limiting condition, we already start with the palliative care interventions, the emotional support, the psychosocial support, the preparation for the birth of that baby. If it's a baby we know will only live for maybe a few minutes, a few hours, a few days, planning for legacy, planning to make footprints and handprints and photographs, maybe taking a cutting of the hair so that the parents have a remembrance of their baby. And of course, it's not enough to love children to provide palliative care. We need to be educated. We need knowledge and skills, and those grow and develop as you work with the children as well. We need to be very adaptable. If you work in the field, you've got this little one who's a newborn baby, you've got a 15-year-old there that you're dealing with, you've got a 5, 6, 7-year-old, and every time you deal with these individual children, you've got to change your approach, change the way you talk, change the way that your body language is to them. So we need to have communication skills with all of these different ages. And I always say when you work with children, you need to have a sense of wonder because children have a sense of wonder. And these children are also, they're wondrous beings to work with. Next slide, please. And we need a team approach. But you'll find when you're working in children's palliative care, every member of the team is perhaps doing something that normally would be isolated to one particular group. So this is our pharmacist. And you can see how beautifully she communicates with this child. And this child had a very special relationship with the pharmacist, who we so often think is stuck in the pharmacy, working with the medications. So the team has got to be very connected for the children. And in Africa, we say every child is my child, but that child also belongs to everyone else on the team. And we interact, and whoever is with the child has got to know that this child responds best to this kind of communication, to this type of intervention. Next slide, please. So what makes palliative care for children different? As I've said, the basic principles remain the same. It's holistic. It's aimed at the relief of suffering and the improvement of quality of life. But what we see in children is changing pathophysiology of the illness. As the child grows and develops, the condition might change. Some diagnoses are unique to childhood. These children never reach adulthood, and so they're only seen in childhood. So when we look at diagnoses, we have these long lists in childhood that are much longer than the lists of diagnoses in adulthood as well. And then, of course, with a genetic condition, as I told you about Mattie, is that it can impact and affect more than one child. So you have a family that is going through multiple losses, multiple bereavements, and while they're grieving one child who's died, they're also starting to grieve another child who's going to die as well. So dealing with all of that as well with the parents is really difficult sometimes. And then, of course, you have the rare diseases. Some of them have names, others don't have names. And again, that often you only see in childhood. And the genetic, as I've said, may affect more than one person. So next slide, please. Often the prognosis is unclear. You know, you get this child, we've just had a little one who had trisomy 13, and he had heart problems, he had all kinds of anomalies. And we were told when he came into the children's hospice, you know, he might live to 6 months. Well, he died recently and he was 5 years old. And so we have prognostication can be really difficult with these children. And the parents always ask how long, because they want to plan. But so often we can't say how long. That little one who's meant to only live for a day might still be with them 3 weeks later. So we have to be adaptable, and we have to be there to support the family who have so much uncertainty. And then, of course, we don't know how this illness is going to affect them as they grow and develop. And not just physically. As they grow and develop and have more understanding, they have an understanding that they have a condition which is different to other children, that they can't do the things that other children do, that they can't go often to the same schools. And we need to then deal with the emotions and the spiritual pain that they have. And then, of course, the impact on the family, because no family prepares to have children with long-term serious illnesses. It affects their finances, it affects relationships, it affects their ability to do their job. And often it affects that whole community, society around them. Sometimes that society is just so supportive, and other times that society stays away because they don't know what to do. And so communication, when we talk about communication, we're not just talking about the child and the family. How do you communicate with the other children in their school, with the parents of the children, with the community or the faith group that they belong to? And then, of course, when we're dealing with bereavement in children and families, we are dealing again with these children at different ages and different developmental stages. And so the way that we help and support them in their grief and bereavement is going to change. So next slide, please. Many causes of death as we've spoken about, and the adult palliative care guidelines, which we have more of than the children's ones, but we do have good children's ones, and in India, are often inappropriate. This is Joan, he's got Pompe disease, and this is one of his medications. Of course, he has multiple medications, and this is only the list of the side effects of the medications that this little child could have. And he's doing beautifully, I'm really pleased to say. And we need to remember as well. So Joan was diagnosed very early. He's now 12, turning 13. So his emotions, his understanding, his physical condition has changed as well. And so now he's needing more and more psychosocial and spiritual support as he grows up and learns to cope with the Pompe disease that he has. Next slide, please. If we look at the list from WHO, this is a global picture of the type of conditions that are most prevalent in children with palliative care needs. And you'll see the two that are the highest are neonatal conditions and protein energy malnutrition. So this is a huge contributor to death in children. You see it in India, we see it in Africa, we see it in Eastern Europe, we see it throughout the world, that there are children who actually could live longer if only their nutritional status had been improved from early on. And then, of course, the next group is HIV. So we have a lot of HIV in Africa, you have a lot of HIV in India as well. And so we might think that cancer, excuse me, cancer would be the major cause of death. It's only 6%. Meningitis, also very, very high in the causes of death and requiring palliative care for the disabilities it can cause, for the pain it can cause, for the impact on the family as well. So this is a global picture, but every country has got a different picture, of course. South Africa, HIV is the top cause. Next slide, please. And so there are categories of conditions. I'm not going to go in great detail. And these were developed originally by ACT, now put together for Short Lives. And the one is, the first category are children who have a life-threatening condition, like cancer, for which curative treatment may be possible, but it can fail. So a lot of cancers fall in there, organ failure that can be reversed, like renal failure, that perhaps they go into a time of having dialysis and that renal failure gets reversed. So this is quite a large group of the children that we do care for. Next slide, please. Then we have conditions where we know that this child might even grow to adulthood, but this condition will probably be the cause of their early death. And so while cystic fibrosis and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy used to lead to early death, now some of these children, when they're in places where they can get really intensive treatment, can live into their 30s, but it still will be the cause of their life being shorter. Next slide, please. These are progressive conditions without curative treatment options that we know will cause an early death, like Batten disease and other conditions, genetic conditions like that. Next slide, please. And then the fourth group is actually one of the biggest groups. These are children who have non-progressive conditions, and if they have really good care and good support, then they can actually live a long life. But very often, because of this, of the severity of their disability, like a child with severe cerebral palsy, someone who has brain or spinal cord injury, when they live perhaps in poverty where they cannot get all the health care that they should have, then often this is a cause of premature death. And so if we look at children with cerebral palsy for many different reasons, you often find, and we find, that this is one of the biggest groups that we are caring for. Next slide, please. And so if we look across the world, UNICEF and ICPCN, the International Children's Palliative Care Network, did some research on this, and they discovered that there were more than 21 million children around the world who need palliative care. Most of the children are in low and middle income countries, as you can imagine, where the access to palliative care and the resources needed to provide palliative care are limited. So where the greatest need is, the resources are the least. Where the smaller need is, in the more developed parts of the world, the greater are the resources. Next slide, please. And then communication. Communication is absolutely the foundation of all we do. And of course it changes. I mean, if you just look at this picture, and this is Secho with a little baby in our children's hospice. I mean, they don't need words, do they? You can see that communication coming right through on this picture. Next slide, please. And to communicate, we need to recognize their humanity. This is Lucy. Lucy is one of the great patient advocates in palliative care. She was a patient advocate when she was young, and now that she's in her late 20s, she is a general advocate. And she has had more impact on WHO than all of the rest of us advocating together. Because when Dr. Tedros heard her speak, that really changed his approach to palliative care. When she was 16, she started developing muscle weakness, a variety of other neuromuscular weaknesses. She had a misdiagnosis in the beginning. And after a few years, they realized that she had been misdiagnosed and she underwent other tests. But Lucy always said she would go to the gastroenterologist and he would look at her gastrointestinal tract. She'd go to the neurologist and he would be looking at her neurological system. She would go to the physical therapist who would be looking at the movements that she could make. But eventually, after a number of years, it took a long time for them to refer her to a palliative care program. And she said it was like a whole new world opened up. For the first time, someone wasn't just looking at a system in her body. They were looking at Lucy and they wanted to know who Lucy was. And Lucy is this incredibly eloquent. She writes beautifully. She is very, very ill now. I think her condition is probably nearing the end now. But she has spoken in Parliament. She's spoken to WHO through Zoom. She's written extensively. And I would encourage you just to really look up Lucy Watt, because she has made a huge impact on the field of palliative care for children, for adolescents, and now for the whole field, for adults as well. So next slide, please. And that's Molly. That's Molly, her dog. We need to remember that children are very comfortable with something greater than they are, with the sacred. We think it's so difficult for a child to understand spiritual things. It's not. They understand implicitly and naturally when they're searching for meaning. And I just love that letter, these letters to God. On the first side, very practical. Did you mean for the giraffe to look like that? Or was it an accident? Was it a mistake that he had such a long neck? And this one from Daniel, I think, is so profound, really. He says, "Dear God," here's a poem. "I love you because you give us what we need to live. But I wish you would tell me why you made it so we have to die." And I think that's a question we often ask ourselves as adults as well. But this little boy of 8, he wasn't scared to ask God this question. Next slide, please. They have magical thinking, and we often have to deal with this. They think they did something wrong that was the cause of their illness or their parents' illness or the death of a sibling or a parent. Perhaps they've been naughty, perhaps they told a lie, perhaps they've been cross, and then mom dies or they get sick, and they think that what they did was the cause, this magical thinking, and we have to really help them with this to see that they aren't the cause of their own illness. It's magical thinking, the belief that unrelated events are causally connected, despite the lack of any logical link between them. So we need to look out for that with children. That child who becomes very withdrawn, becomes depressed, changes in behavior, and it can be because they have this guilty feeling that they've been the cause of what is happening. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we talked about the languages and expression and communication, and teaching children, and children actually don't need to be taught. Children are automatically, intrinsically and responsibly, they are creative. That little one who's just learned to stand and they hear a bit of music and they start bouncing to the music. The love of making a mess and then looking at it and seeing it as something of beauty. And so art in any form of creative arts is absolutely essential. And that's where we've got to get down and dirty as well. And it doesn't matter if you get covered in pink paint. The love of music, if we want to get them to relax so that they're going to express themselves better with us, music is wonderful. Even if we can just move them slightly to the music, or if they can sing along. Dance, we often forget the value of dance. Again, being able to express their emotions. Many years ago, I had a teenage patient. She'd been this tiny, slim, beautiful, clever, musical, artistic young girl, and she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And she had surgery, she had radiotherapy, she had chemotherapy, she was on cortisone, and this tiny little girl became bloated, she lost her hair, her muscles became weak, and she finally lost her sight. And I was with her one day, and we were talking, and she was very quiet. Normally she was quite conversational. We could have, and then some music came on, and it was very sensual music. And she stood up and she did the most sensual dance. And this is her expression that I'm a teenager. And inside this lumpy, large, hairless body is a beautiful teenager who wants to express their sexuality as well. So we need to use dance. And then, of course, poetry. Poetry is such a powerful form of expression. It can be a simple poem, it can be a 5-pager, but let children write poetry as well. It's their form of communicating. Next slide, please. Art. I mean, it's quite easy to see what we think these children are saying. And so we think that this child doesn't like injections. And they're frightened and they're crying because they don't like injections. It might not be the injection. He might have put the injection there for us to see that this is a nurse, but actually he doesn't want to be in hospital. He might be telling us that. It might be telling us there's a nurse that he's frightened of and he doesn't like. So never interpret without asking. If they can draw a picture like that and they can talk, ask them. Say to them, tell me who this is and tell me who that is. And why is he crying? Let them tell you the reasons. And this child as well, who drew this house, all different colors. Now, if you go to Sunflower House, it's actually the one wall is covered in sunflowers. It's got a cream background, it's got yellow and green and black on it. And this child had painted different colors. And when we said to them, is this Sunflower House that you've said here, Sunflower House Hospice for Children? Because, you know, it didn't have the wall. And they said yes, but they wanted it in all these colors because this is their favorite colors and Sunflower House is their favorite house. And that's why they put all their favorite colors on it, even though it didn't look like Sunflower House if you saw it. So don't interpret ever. Ask for meaning if you can. And if you have to interpret because the child cannot tell you, be very, very cautious and look for all the different possible interpretations. So next slide, please. And this is a little girl whose granny was dying. And everybody said, but she doesn't know that granny's very sick and granny's going to die. And when I asked her to draw a picture, this is the picture she drew. So what was she drawing? She was drawing the graves with the crosses on them. And she was drawing an angel, not standing on the ground, but the angel was going up into heaven. So when we talked about it, she knew very well, this little girl, that her granny was very sick and was going to die. and she knew about graveyards, and she knew about angels, and this is her way of expressing it. Next slide, please. And I love this as well. I thought this was just a lovely way to end the section on drawing, is this lady who told her daughter that her job was to teach people how to draw. And this little girl said, but you mean they forget? And I think we know that if I were to ask all of you, who of you could draw, who of you can sing, most of you wouldn't put your hands up. But if you ask any child, they'll tell you, yes, of course I can draw. Yes, I can sing. Yes, I can jump high. Because a child knows that actually they can do all these things. We become very constrained as we get older because we're embarrassed about what will people think of our drawing. Next slide, please. And the importance of play. I mean, play is a session all on its own. Play is absolutely essential. It's the way children learn how to grow, how to develop, how to use fine and gross motor skills, how to interact with other people, how to gain bodily confidence, how to gain self-confidence. There are so many powerful lessons that a child learns in play. And I travel quite a lot to different countries, and wherever you go, even if there are no toys, a child will find something to play with. I was at a hospital in Malawi, way up north, quite a rural part of an already rural country. And we went in, and this little boy had found a whole lot of bottle tops from Coke bottles. And he was sitting there and he was playing games with these because there were no toys in the ward. So a child will find something to play with, even if we don't provide it. But it is better if we give them a selection of toys, because they will choose toys that can show you how they feel. Next slide, please. And Albert Einstein, that great scientist, he said play is the highest form of research, because this is how that child is working out how to do things, how to throw something, how to connect to another person, how to dress and undress when they dress and undress a doll, how to show anger. So for a child, learning to play is their research. And so we have to encourage play. And it's quite fun for us as well. That's what makes children's palliative care so much fun. And these three little ones, they were all really sick and they've all since died. But you can see how happy they were just playing together in front of the wall of sunflowers. So next slide, please. And this was, I always say with children, being outside is so important. Being outside where they can look at nature, where they can sit on the grass, where they can hear the birds, when they can look at the light in the trees, because it makes them think and wonder. And often when they're playing, they'll start talking to each other, and then they'll come and ask you a question. So I want you to think, if a child came to you as these three little ones came to me, and they were all like 3, and one little boy was 4, they'd been playing together, and we'd had a child who died in Sunflower House, and we'd prepared them, and we thought we'd explain to them. And they came up to me in the garden and said, what does it mean to be dead? So I want you just for a moment to think, how would you answer that question? It's going to give you a minute. So next slide, please. And of course, there's possible responses, and it's going to depend on the child, on the situation. You could say to them, why do you ask me that? They might have found a dead frog, and that's what they're asking about. They might have found a dead leaf. It's autumn, or a leaf had fallen, or a flower had died. It's not necessarily about the death of a human being. And we always assume when they ask that question that it is. So why do you ask me that? We can ask them, what do you think? Let them think about it, because then they can tell you. They might say, I don't know. They might say, it makes me frightened to think about it, so I don't like to think about it. It might be that I think it's when I'm dead, I'm going to be better, and I'm going to be able to play like other children. What made you ask that question? Find out why they have come to you. What have you been told? And you might say, which I quite often say, when I recognize it is about somebody who has died, a child who's died, fear of their own death. I have to say I don't know, because I don't. I haven't, it hasn't happened to me, but I can tell them what I think it is like to be dead. And I find with children, they're very accepting of what you say to them. They're very accepting of the fact that yes, people die, just like that leaf dies, just like their dog died, just like that frog is dead. But they want to know when death happens, what happens afterwards. Because for a child, there's always an afterwards. You know, I'm not going to school today, but maybe I'll go after. So we need to dig deeper when we're talking to children. So next slide, please. And so I want to just briefly, because this is again is a huge subject, and we tend to think when a child has pain, it's about giving them the right medication. And of course, giving them the right medication is incredibly important. But there are so many other things that we can do for a child in pain. And often we give the medication and we have other things that we do alongside it. So next slide, please. And we need to remember, just like with us as adults, if a child has pain, it's not only physical. It affects them psychologically. They have psychological, emotional pain. They have spiritual pain. They have interruptions within their social milieu. They have interruptions to their ability for them to express themselves culturally. So when we look at pain, we have to look at it holistically. The next slide, please. And when we approach it, we have to say, is there something that we can fix? Is there something that we can reverse? What is causing the pain? And so, of course, immaculate assessment is so important. An assessment of the body, mind, and spirit, because they all interact. And sometimes if you deal with their spiritual pain, it's going to have a knock-on effect and reduce the emotional and reduce the physical pain as well. We try to use non-drug measures because medications have side effects. We know that. And so if there is a way, distraction that we can use, massage, warmth, cold, water, all different things that we could use that I'll talk about a little bit later, we try to use that. And then, of course, we use the medication specific to the reason why they have the pain. And we also have to address the psychosocial and the spiritual distress. So this child might have cancer, had chemotherapy, and when he says, I've got pain, you might think it's the cancer itself, but it could be oral thrush, which is very painful. And that actually by dealing with that, we're going to reduce the pain. And we've got to help the mother and whoever is the primary caregiver to cope with this as well. So there's a lot of teaching that goes on in children's palliative care, because the primary caregiver, invariably the mother or the grandmother in Africa, has got to be helped, because they are going to be dealing with this most of the time. Next slide, please. We reverse the reversible, we seek the cause, we treat what can be treated, we stop the offending medications if possible, and we might try some other kind of medication. The next slide, please. And we examine the child from head to toe, because it might not be, as I've said, something that we think it is. Next slide, please. And so it could be in the mouth, and you know, often dental issues get ignored with these children. Dental issues are very important and can cause a lot of discomfort and pain and can impact on their nutrition as well. Next slide, please. The ears, earache, we know it's very painful. Next slide, please. Something to do with the eyes. So remember, every little bit of this child has got to be examined. It's not a quick scanning. We look very carefully at this child. Next slide, please. And of course, it could be something where they have a swelling somewhere in their body that is causing pressure and causing pain. These are just a few of the things that we need to look at. So the next slide, please. We could use the QUEST principle to assess the pain, which is question the child and the parent, because they see the child and they're often the one who has to answer. Use pain rating scales. I know there's no perfect pain rating scale, but if you don't measure it, how can you tell that things have improved? People think that they're there to be used for exams, but actually use them all the time. Evaluate the behavior and how there are physiological changes with this child. You need to secure the parent, the primary caregiver's involvement. You need to take the cause of the pain into account, and then you need to take action. And that action can be a variety of things: medication, non-medication measures. It could be surgery. It could be palliative chemotherapy, palliative radiotherapy as well. So next slide, please. We might, with a baby, use the flax scale, where we look at the face and the legs, the activity, how much they're crying, how much they can be consoled. And this is the most validated scale, and it is actually a very good one to use for the small child and also for the child who's disabled and is unable to tell you how they're feeling. Next slide, please. The Elan Body Tool I really like, because the child then shows you exactly on this where their pain is. Next slide, please. And the revised faces pain scale. I think we all know the Baker Wong ones, little round faces that you see. These, they say, are easier for children. I haven't really found much difference in whether we use the Wong Baker or the revised faces pain scale. But remembering, it's not about what the child's face looks like. It is what that child feels inside, is the intensity of the pain. And just like when we deal with pain in adults, these children have to understand how the pain scale works. Next slide, please. And of course, the simplest is a simple 1 to 10, 1 to 5. We often teach, especially our care workers in the community, use your hand. You know, you can have 0, no pain, a little bit of pain, more pain, a lot of pain, and the worst pain possible. You always you have a hand with you. It doesn't have to be carried with you, and we can use that for pain rating as well. Older children might want to keep a pain diary, and then you can work out, is there something that is initiating the pain with these children? And it gives them a bit of control over their own pain. And of course, there are pain apps that they can use as well if they have suitable resources. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we've got to look at, does this pain affect their behavior? And are there any physiological changes? Stefan Friedrichsdorf, who's one of the greats, he always says the first thing that he does with children before dealing with anything else, he gets them back into their routine, he gets them back to school. He says to parents, stop giving them any time, they can go to bed anytime they like, they can do anything they like, put them back into a routine, into a structure, and often this helps with the pain before you even look at them at the medication. Next slide, please. And this is really a very good document to look at, where they talk about pharmacology alone is not the only thing that you need to look at. And we need to look at analgesia without over-sedation. So we need to use the minimum amount of medication because of possible side effects, and also because we might need to escalate. We need to see, is there something else we can do? Is it a limb that needs splinting that's going to help the pain? Is it something that we can give exercise to, massage, all of these other ways that we can treat pain, and can we put it together with the medication to do this multimodal analgesia? So we have basic analgesia, we have the opiates as well, and we have the adjuvants. And I'm sure you have had a talk about pain itself, and those adjuvants might vary depending on what part of the world, which country you're in, and what is available on the state medicine list. And then, of course, you might, with severe pain, you might even be looking at some kind of nerve block to relieve the pain as well, or even surgery. Next slide, please. Rehabilitation, really important. Exercise, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, all of these are part of dealing with pain, and psychotherapy. Because, as we've said, body, mind, and spirit is so connected. So we look at how do we deal with their emotions? How do we deal with their spiritual pain and their spiritual suffering and their spiritual and emotional anger as well? And once we reduce those, we often find that the physical medications that treat the physical pain can be reduced. And these are just some ideas of non-pharmacological therapies, mind-body techniques such as mindfulness, breathing, blowing bubbles. Children love bubbles. Self-hypnosis, teaching them how to have control over their pain. Muscle relaxation, massage, aromatherapy. The girl I told you about with the brain tumor, towards the end of life, she had whole body pain. The steroids were no longer working. The morphine was helping, but not properly. And an aromatherapist came in and said, I want to come and give her a whole body massage in the morning and evening. And we were able to reduce her medication to a third of what she had been taking. And then, of course, virtual reality. So the next slide, please. And this is being used more and more, but of course it's expensive. But it takes the child out of their pain and away from the reality of what is happening to them. Next slide, please. And so as we work in the field of palliative care in general, we have to absolutely recognize the role of technology. It's a very important part of how we work in palliative care. It can be something like the virtual reality. It can be something like a 3D printer that can produce an artificial arm, an artificial foot, an artificial hand. It can be something like a drone that is carrying medication. We need to recognize that technology is part of what we do, and we need to be comfortable with it. Next slide, please. And in humanitarian crises, where I also work, it's very important. And technology is seen as so important that every UN agency now has a department that looks at technology and innovation, including UNICEF, which of course is the primary UN agency for children. Next slide, please. And it allows us to do virtual consultation. So you might be sitting in a refugee camp and need consultations on palliative care and not have anyone doing palliative care within the medical response team. And there are very, very few palliative care experts actually working in palliative care response teams, that you can do virtual consultations through technology, like what we are using now. So next slide, please. And then the different challenge that we are seeing, and I just want to mention it, that when children come from very poor backgrounds, they have long-term chronic illnesses, they go into hospital, and the kids, everybody loves them, and they spoil them. They buy them a cell phone, they buy them airtime. They want chocolate ice cream, they get chocolate ice cream. Then they go home, and they go home back to poverty. And what we are seeing is that some older children, not all of them, they're actually deliberately managing their condition so that they will be readmitted to hospital. And we have to watch out for this for these children. Next slide, please. And so we'll look at end of life now very briefly, because end of life can be very hard. It's hard on the child, it's hard on the family, and it's hard on us as well, because especially our kids that we've had for a long time, and it can be very hard to deal with end of life for all of us. Next slide, please. And we need to recognize many children who come into our programs, families have abandoned because of their own poverty. They can't look after the child, but this child needs to be accompanied because this disease is overwhelming. And so we need to always have that constant caring adult who's with the child. Ideally, it's a parent, but often the parent is not there. Next slide, please. Dr. Poheng Chong from Singapore, he and Catherine Walsh did this excellent research, and it was published in PubMed, and he said part of a good death for a child, after interviewing parents and children, is first letting go, for the child to let go of life and for the parents to let go of the child. It means acknowledging the child. What is the child feeling? What is their wish? The parents want to go on. Let's try another treatment, another chemotherapy, another radiotherapy. And the child might say, enough, enough. We need to listen to the child. It means looking at closure. What does the child want to do for closure? I had a little one of 3, but very few words. But just before he died, he had me driving him around to his favorite people, taking him to his favorite shop to get a Coke and to get Smarties, taking him to feed the ducks. And only then, when he'd done all of that and when he'd seen the stars, did he die. He knew he was dying, and that was his form of closure. So we need to see what is for the child and for the parent important in having closure to this very precious short life. And then the child and the family need to feel they're in control, that we're giving them choices. We're not saying, well, now we're going to discontinue this. We're having a conversation with them, and whatever decisions that we make are combined decisions. And we need to recognize that no matter how sick your child is, how you know in your brain that this child is not going to get better, we need to also acknowledge that that parent, that child might always have that glimmer of hope. And we don't say, no, they're not going to get better. What we can say is, I really hope so. But we keep talking, we keep communicating. So next slide, please. So we need to have systems and processes in place. This isn't something that we just go and say, we'll deal with it when it happens. We need to have that advanced care plan. And we need to allow as much normality as possible, time for cuddles, even if the child is dying, time for communication, time for comfort and connection. Next slide, please. And you can use the ABCD approach, which is quite easy to remember. So A stands for Advanced Care Plan. What are we going to do? Is this child for resuscitation in any form? Where is the death to happen? What are the child's wishes? Do they wish to be at home? Or maybe home is just not suitable. We need to listen to the child's wishes and as far as possible to meet that wish. Who does the child want with them? We assume the child wants the parents. The child might want to protect the parents. That older child might feel, Mommy's not going to cope with me dying. I would rather be with somebody else. I'd rather be in hospital, in hospice. We need to know who the key role players are. Who's important in decision-making and at end of life? We need to look at resources. What will be needed? Are we going to need oxygen? Are we going to need a suction? Are we going to need a bed out in the garden because the child loves the garden? Excuse me. So we need to plan. There has to be a plan in place. Next slide, please. The B is to look at the big picture. So what is the impact on this child, on the siblings, on the family, on the friends? How are we going to comfort everybody within this situation? What are there cultural rituals that have to take place when this child is dying or after the death? Are there religious beliefs that need to be respected? Or are there religious beliefs that we actually sometimes have to limit because they can bring more harm than good? We have to look at who decides. What are the ethical issues? Are we doing harm? Are we doing good? And are there any legacy actions that we can do that is going to help the child feel they've left a legacy? It might be writing their own will. It might be leaving their toys to named people. It might be for the parents to have photographs, to have handprints, footprints, to have a lock of hair, to have a copy of the hospital form, something as simple as that. It might be a photograph of the staff who looked after the child. What are the legacy actions that we can plan and do? Next slide, please. Communication, we've talked about a lot, but please what I ask you is don't forget the siblings and don't forget the grandparents, because the grandparents are hurting for their grandchild, but they're also hurting for their own child who's losing a child. We need to be honest always, and gentle honesty is really important. And we need to explain and explain and explain. Oh, sorry, as much as they need it. Next slide, please. Excuse me a moment. And then I'm just going to get a bit more water. Excuse me a moment. Next slide, please. And D is for death. The preparation for the death, telling them what to expect, the rituals around death. Do they want the faith leader involved? And then the legal requirements. Who can pronounce the death? And that differs from country to country. And then to give time after death. The first child I ever cared for was a little girl with spinal muscular atrophy. I was brand new in hospice. We knew nothing. There'd been no training in South Africa. We were learning. And very soon after the death, I called the undertaker and the baby was taken. 2 years later, I nursed her brother, who also died of SMA too. And then I knew. I helped the mother take the child home from hospital. I left the parents to bath the child, to spend time. And then when they were ready, we took them. The mother held the baby in her arms, and I took them to the undertaker. I learned a lot from those two children. And the care after death, remembering the care of the body and then the care of the family who loved the child. So next slide, please. And bereavement support. There's this huge gaping hole in their lives is essential. And if we're battling to cope with the death, we need to recognize our own grief and go for help with that as well. And to give ourselves time to grieve and to acknowledge that it is normal to grieve the loss of a child. Next slide, please. Spiritual assessment and care, that itself is a subject all on its own. But remember, spirituality is really, we're all spiritual beings. And that tiny little child is a spiritual being. So how do we help them find meaning and purpose in what is happening, in connecting and transcendence over this, what is happening to them, and finding hope, hope for a cure, hope for comfort, hope for life after death. What is that hope? We need to recognize that as well. And then we need to recognize the mystery and the paradox. The connectedness is what we work with the children most of all, helping them connect to themselves, to others, to nature, to something greater than they are. But there's a lot written about spiritual care, and I would advise you to read it. Next slide, please. And then I think this is, I always say, we talk so much about knowledge and skills and competence. Often what we need together with it is good common sense. And Dr. Liz Molyneux, who started a wonderful program in Malawi, she said, do things simply and do them well. Don't try and be too fancy. Kids like simple things. Parents understand simple explanations, simple actions. Next slide, please. Use resources. There's a wealth of resources, and the ICPCN e-learning courses are free. So you can link into those, and they're excellent. Next slide, please. So in our hearts, we know the benefit of palliative care for children. Next, please. So why do we allow the present situation where these children are seen as a group that do not get enough attention? So the next slide, please. And this is a challenge to all of us. We have to become advocates for children. We all were children. Many of us have children. We might be blessed in that we have healthy children, but we need to advocate for more resources, for more training, for more posts for children's palliative care, for more essential medications and pediatric formulations. So my challenge to you is become an advocate. Next slide, please. And I love this saying of Andrew Lake, who was the CEO of UNICEF. He said, what we have to do is provide the quiet miracle of a normal life. Despite their serious illness, despite all that is happening, we need to remember the child is a child, and we need to give them as much of a normal childhood as we possibly can. So next slide, please. So I greet you from our beautiful Free State, where I live, to beautiful India. And last slide, please. And the last slide, please. And this is just to say thank you. That is my email address. You're very welcome to contact me. And I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have. And thank you for putting up with my coughing and the technological project and problems. And thank you so much for managing my slides for me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for enlightening us on palliative care in children and the problems faced by them and what pain is to them. Also, thank you for showing us the importance of play, drawings, expressions, etc. in palliative care in children. Thank you so much, ma'am. Handing over to you. Sleep again.
Before we near the end of the session, does anyone have any inputs to share? Any of their experiences or any questions, any queries, any thoughts?
Sure.
Participants are free
Maybe you want to say it. No, carry on, please. I thought.
No, Joan ma'am, all yours, please. You're muted.
No, I wanted to say to everybody, it amazes me how people get afraid of caring for children in palliative care. And I think, we were all children one day. Have we got so old that we've forgotten what it is that a child needs? And that child with palliative care needs, they need love, they need protection, they need nice food, they need their chocolate ice cream and their chicken and chips. And they need security, and they need to know that they are cared for. Just like any child, they need to play, they need education as far as they can go. We're dealing with a child with an illness, but basically we're dealing with a child.
So true, ma'am, so true. Like when we were child, our needs were also limited. Like it were limited to, as you say, chocolates, colors, and playgrounds. So that is what every child, even though generations change, the need of the children never change much. So in case no one else has anything to share, I think we can wind up today's session. Joan ma'am, thank you so much for joining us and giving us such an informative and insightful session. I believe everyone would have benefited from that a lot. So maybe at times it personally took me to some of my childhood memories where I also used to do some paintings and all. So that would have brought out the childhood memories in at least some of us. So with that note, this is Sri Priya along with Mr. Emil George signing off from the Tips Echo Desk. See you in the next session with another interesting topic and another eminent faculty. Till then, everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, be happy. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.